Um, so I've been trying to get up the nerve to make this video for a while. Not because I have some like fear or trepidation and about being vulnerable or opening up. It's just that it's really hard to convey grief in a constructive way when part of grief is the anger and the sadness and the denial and the blame and the guilt and all of the baggage that comes with it. And I'm not an expert in grief, but I feel like I've been through some grief. I've definitely like seen some shit. I lost my grandmother who helped me raise me too young. I grieved that. I mourned the loss of my life with my mother prior to her marriage to my abusive stepfather. I grieved that in the most unhealthy ways possible. I lost a very good friend to cancer, Danny, when we were 21. I watched him die for months, and I grieved. I grieved again for Danny's little sister, Katie, when she was murdered less than a year later by her boyfriend. I grieved when another friend named Katie was murdered by her boyfriend, only a couple of months later. I grieved losing one of my best friends in the world, my mom's mother, my grandma, who I was very close to. I've been through grief in a multitude of ways, but nothing is like the grief of suicide. So September is Suicide Awareness Month, and I've been wanting to make a series of videos with people I know and love, and they trust me, and I want to talk about grief in a healthy way. But I keep putting it off because it's scary, and because it's an ugly grief. It's a really fucking ugly grief. But this morning, as I was looking for something in my closet, we recently moved, and my mom helped unpack things because I broke my foot and my ankle, and so, you know, she was so amazing and came over and really helped unpack my whole house. But that means there were things she put places that I didn't know where they were there. So this morning I was looking for something, and I saw a big plastic bag, and it had something black in it, and I was like, I wonder if that's a pair of my leggings that I have never worn or something. And I opened it, and the smell hit me, and it wasn't a great smell. It wasn't a terrible smell, but it was like bam, 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 bam. These grief waves just start hitting you, because when you're going through a grief this traumatic, your brain forgets things to protect you. Your brain understands that what you're feeling is harmful to your body and your health and your mind, and so it tries to protect you the best way it knows how, by, you know, blocking things out and hiding things and storing them and casting them away, and you forget. And what was in this bag was my best friend's shirt, his work shirt, the day that he wore the day he committed suicide. And I guess I had forgotten some of this, but he was my best friend for about 23 years. I'm 34. 22 or 23 years. we were very close. We talked the morning of his death. He went to work. We texted during the day like usual. He called me after work, talked about our nights. He was gonna go meet the girl that he'd been seeing, and I'm grateful that we had that conversation, because the last thing I ever heard Chase say was "I love you too." But just a couple hours later, he committed suicide. And his father's way of handling grief was to immediately that day get the funeral planned, get Chase cremated, prepare his stuff. I got the phone call from Chase's sister Lindsay at like 9 in the morning on a Wednesday, and the funeral was 2 days later. And I never got to say goodbye. I didn't get any of the ashes. His dad just made all these like rapid fire decisions, because his method of grief is to run away. And so after the funeral, my husband drove me to Chase's house so that I could collect things, because I knew that his dad was just gonna throw them away. And he did. He trashed a lot of stuff. And when I say like rapid fire decisions, I mean he literally threw out his daughter's stuff, Chase's stuff, his wife, who had only recently passed, got rid of their belongings, got engaged to a woman he knew for like 5 seconds, put the house up for sale and moved to Texas within like a week of Chase's death. You know, like I was very fortunate that I was able to contact people who lived in Arkansas and ask them to go save boxes of Chase's things for me to be able to go through before they just got put in the dumpster. But the day of the funeral, when we were in Arkansas, I stood in the bathroom where he died, and I stood where he died, and I would just remember sitting there like staring at the walls and the floor and like trying to find like a speck of blood to prove to me that it had actually happened. But it had all been professionally cleaned, and it looked like a house that was ready to be for sale, because that's what was gonna happen. And I was so desperate to smell him, or to feel him, that I opened up his dirty clothes hamper, and his shirt that he had worn that day to work. He was a chef. It was in the dirty clothes, you know, and it had food and sweat, and I took it out, and I went into his room, and I mean, I just grabbed things that I needed, like at that moment. I grabbed his wallet, which of course his dad had already cleaned out, but it had his license in it. So I have his wallet with his license, and I have his Zippo lighter, and I have his graduation certificate from drug court. So all these things were in this plastic bag that I opened this morning, and all these flashbacks of those days just start hitting me, and I think to myself, like, there are millions of people out there who share this grief with me, and we don't get to talk about it much because it's uncomfortable. No one wants to talk to someone who is grieving a suicide. Like, there's always going to be blame. There's always going to be the what ifs. There's always going to be the guilt. It's just never ending. And so finding that shirt made me say, I need to stop procrastinating, and I need to start this process of documenting my grief, as well as the people who I love and trust that are also dealing with this grief. And my intent is to make a series of short documentary style clips where we can just talk, like at the camera, by ourselves, about our grief and what it's like, so that maybe someone struggling with their own mental illness and their own health and their own ideas of suicide, maybe they'll see this video and they'll think about their sister or their best friend of their whole life in the aftermath. Because what I've come to learn is that Chase thought of himself as a burden. And part of that is because of his childhood and the trauma and his family and the toxicity. But he also thought he was a burden to me because he didn't understand why I never gave up on him. He had addiction problems. He had been in jail. He had done the drug court. He had graduated from it. Not very many people graduate from this drug court program at all. I visited him in jail. I gave him the real talks that we needed to. When he told me that his dad had never come to visit him in jail, I went to his dad's work and I hunted him down and I made him uncomfortable, and I was like, you need to do this because trauma, Chase needs to know that he's still loved by more than just me, right? We all need to know that we're loved by more than one person, especially if that person, I'm not his dad or his mom. He needed to feel that love. And so he got clean, and he was almost 2 years sober when he committed suicide. He had really bonded with his mom right after he got clean. His mom got diagnosed with cancer, and at first it was no big deal. She was like, oh, I'll just take an early retirement and have chemo and be over it and move on with my life. But that's not what happened. The cancer just ate her alive, and she died. And so Chase was her primary caregiver because his dad ran away to work every day, as a way of coping with what was happening at home. So, he's an addict, and he's surrounded by opiates and pills and everything that he could possibly need to relapse, and he didn't. He took care of his mother while she was dying for months, administered her pain medication, administered everything she needed to be okay, and still stayed sober and kept moving. And so his mom died, and I personally struggle with grief in that my husband and me and my daughter, we move around a lot because my husband is military. We made the decision to move away from Arkansas for a job opportunity for my husband, and I have documented conversations with people talking about how the only thing that I didn't want to leave Arkansas for was Chase, because I was getting to see him every day, and like my daughter was getting to give her Uncle Chase a hug every single day on his way home from work. He lived about 1 block behind me. And so I expressed this trepidation of mine and this fear of leaving to Chase. And he was always so like, no, I'm not gonna fuck up. I'm not gonna relapse. I'm not ever going back to jail. I'm not ever going to do this again. He wanted to be better and bigger. And, but that doesn't change the fact that after he committed suicide, I have all this guilt about leaving. I don't think that he would have committed suicide if I was still there. I think that he would have been at my house after work, like he was every day. I think he would have been playing video games with my daughter and eating dinner with our family, and my guilt is that like I feared something would happen. I feared he would relapse. But what ended up happening was so much worse. Like it's impossible to describe the guilt that I have to talk myself out of. So grief, the main point of this. Grief's crazy. You know, like you lose someone you love to a disease and you accept it. And maybe you lose someone you love to a tragic accident and you accept it. But when you lose someone you love, as much as I loved Chase, to suicide, and you are left with the aftermath of his decision, grief is a fucking monster. Like it just like sucks everything out of you, and you become shell-shocked and you become numb. And I can't tell you how many times people have said that I'm not the same person as I was prior to May 7th, 2019. And I will never be that person again, because this grief changed me down to like the cellular level of my body. And it's crazy. It's like you're laying on a beach and you're enjoying the sun and you're like, oh God, this feels good, everything's going okay. And then, you know, you get a piece of sand in your eye and you're just losing your mind. Like, that's how grief is. It's like the tiniest little particle of sand can do so much damage. You can be totally fine and working and thriving, and then a smell will hit you, or a song, or someone's weird conversation, and it will just be like everything is coming in on you again. I've learned how to process my grief much more healthily, I think, by speaking about it. I have been able to be honest with people about how I feel in a more organic way now. I've had some really good natural connections with people that I probably never would have before this. I feel fortunate because a week to the day after Chase died, I drove 45 minutes north of Kansas City to a grief group, and I hated it. I hated it. I didn't understand how people could be laughing and talking and friendly, and it was so soon that I wasn't in the state of mind to actually take anything away from that meeting. So the next week, I went to a different one. I ended up hating that one even more. It was, the personalities and the atmosphere was just awful for me. And so the joke in our grief group is that I began, driving 45 minutes for this group in North Kansas City, because they sucked less. And that's the truth. Like, it sucks knowing this feeling. It sucks on Wednesday nights knowing that I am about to go to a suicide support group. I am not happy to have met all these people. I'm grateful that they're in my life now, though. There's nothing that can prepare you for grief like this. I, at first, was really angry, of course. So I went through all the normal stages. Anger, blame. The detective stage where I got all the police reports and the coroner's reports, and I found out things that I needed to know for my own sanity. Because when he died, Chase's dad, he needed to spin his story to make his grief, survivable. And so he told me things that in my gut I knew were not true. And then, when I got the coroner's report and the police reports, I confirmed that the things that he had told me were not true. And it's one of those situations where you're like, whatever you need to tell yourself is fine, but I needed to know the truth. So I went through that detective stage. I tried to break into his email. I was desperate for anything, any kind of clue, any kind of goodbye note, anything at all, because suicide was not something that we talked about death because he was an addict, and I was honest with him about my fears of one day getting a phone call that he had overdosed and died. And we knew lots of people that have died from opiates and fentanyl, and so death was not an off topic for us. We talked about how he went to the funeral of a friend who had relapsed and overdosed, and he hated at the funeral that everybody sainted him, they made him perfect and wonderful, and he was so upset after that he came over to the house and talked, and he was like, I need you to promise me that if I die before you do, you won't let people do that about me. And I was like, no. And then I made him promise the same thing. So death was not something we didn't talk about. We were open about it. But there were none of the signs, now that I know more about suicide, there were signs. The Robin Williams effect is what I call it. Someone that is so desperate for happiness that they make an effort to make everybody else happy and laugh, and that was him. He was just like that, but I didn't know that at the time. I just thought this was Chase's personality, but in reality, his humor was his way of compensating for his depression and his childhood trauma and his mental illness and everything else. And so when you're talking about traditional signs, there was nothing, right? Nothing. There was never a cry for help. And so the night that it happened, I believe, and this is going from the 3 different police reports I read and the coroner's report, I believe that he fell asleep driving home and wrecked his car. And I believe that his conversation with his father, when he called to ask his father to come get him in the car, was not a healthy conversation. His father asked someone who was there at the scene to take Chase to the hospital. Chase didn't feel like he needed to go to the hospital. So that person dropped him off at the house, and his father then called saying that the police were with him and needed to interview him. And remember, I've seen like the toxicology reports. I've seen everything. I think that Chase thought that he had fucked up so bad, and the reaction from his father and then the fear of the police, I think that he had just a manic moment of, I'm not going back to jail. And the way he committed suicide, which I'm not going to talk about on camera, was very deliberate. When I read the police report and saw the details, it was clear to me that he was clear-headed in some respect because of just how he handled things. I won't ever know really what happened that night, but I know that he was probably scared, and that's like one of the hardest parts of this whole thing for me, because he could call me about everything. He could call me day and night, and we could talk about everything. He could call me when he was all strung out and talk, and I just want to know why that night he didn't pick up the phone and just call me. I will never have an answer for that. I will never know. And so I have to believe that he thought he would be helping his dad and me and the people that loved him by not being alive anymore, by not being a burden. And my message to Chase will always be like, his life and his mistakes and his choices and his problems and his addictions, like, those were never burdens. But like his death, his suicide is a burden that I will feel in my soul for the rest of my life. I don't really have much else to say. I think it's obvious that there's not a time limit on grief. A lot of people feel like I should be over it, right? Because it's been a year. It's been 1/23 of the amount of time that I spent with him. This is a person who stood beside me on my wedding day to my husband. This is a person who, when I was dating an emotionally abusive, horrible person, would go out of his way to rescue me from situations I didn't need to be in because I was too stupid to realize that. My daughter called him Uncle Chase. And now what I'm left with is this grief and a couple personal items. A smelly shirt from the day he died, his wallet, all I'm left with is this bittersweet love of someone in the purest way, that is just never going to change, because there was never an ending, you know. There's never an end to that story. There will never be closure. There will never be answers. There will never be the whole truth. There will never be another I love you from him. There will never be. I have like 60 more years of living with only the memories of someone that I loved with my whole heart. And that grief is fucking hard. It's ugly. And so I hope that me being vulnerable in my story and the stories that I'll share with everybody, if it helps one person, man, I hope that nobody else ever has to feel what I feel. I don't ever want it. I don't ever want to meet anybody else that knows this pain. I wish that I could. I wish that I could fucking cure this. It's not possible. So be kind to your loved ones. You know, tell them that you love them. That's not ever something that Chase and I had a problem with. We loved each other, and he loved my daughter, and she loved him, and my husband loved him, and he loved my husband. And so I'm grateful for that. There were no unspoken I love yous. But, you know, appreciate life, even in its darkest moments. And remember that the burden of a suicide on the people that are left, the survivors of that suicide, is millions and millions and millions times worse than your burden that you believe you are could ever be. And I wish I could say that to Chase now. That's all I've got. Thanks for listening.